It was a bright and sunny morning in downtown Dallas. The streets were busy with people rushing to work, grabbing coffee, and getting on with their day. Among all the hustle, there was one man who seemed like he didn't belong to the chaos, even though he was right in the middle of it. His name was Elijah, and he was a delivery driver. He didn't stand out much, but there was something about him, something calm. Elijah wasn't the kind of person to speak loudly or try to get attention. He did his job quietly and with dignity. Today, though, was going to be different. He had an important delivery to make. He had to drop off some of the freshest seafood and organic vegetables to a restaurant called Bel Andrea's, one of the most expensive and fancy places in the city. Elijah wasn't used to places like this. He usually stayed away from the fancy, high-end spots. But today, he had no choice. His truck rolled through the back alley of the restaurant, where deliveries were supposed to go. Even the loading area looked like it was designed to remind you that this wasn't a place for everyone. Elijah grabbed his clipboard, put on his gloves, and started unloading the boxes. He was focused, his mind on the job. But as he walked toward the restaurant's door, he could hear the faint sound of laughter coming from inside. It wasn't the fun kind of laughter. It was the kind that made you feel small, the kind of laugh that made you feel like you were being judged without even saying a word. Elijah shook his head and knocked twice on the steel door. Little did he know, this was the start of a day that would change everything. When the door opened, Elijah was greeted by a young man in a crisp, white chef's jacket. The chef looked at Elijah like he was some kind of inconvenience. Behind him, two other staff members peeked out from the kitchen, one of them trying to hold back a laugh, while the other just rolled her eyes. The chef didn't waste any time. "Deliveries are supposed to come earlier," he snapped, his voice dripping with annoyance. Elijah didn't let it bother him. He calmly held up the invoice. "I'm right on time, sir. Fresh seafood from Gulf Coast imports and the organic greens you asked for." The chef waved him off, his expression bored. "Whatever, just bring it in. And don't block the kitchen entrance." Elijah pushed his dolly inside, keeping his head down and focusing on his work, but he could feel the eyes on him. He noticed the looks from the staff, some were amused, others condescending. One of them muttered, "Guess the company sends anyone to places like this." Elijah kept unloading the boxes carefully, pretending not to hear. But those words, mocking and dismissive, stung more than he let on. He wasn't new to being judged by how he looked or what he did. But today felt different. He had a quiet confidence that told him it wouldn't be long before everything changed. As Elijah wheeled the dolly deeper into the restaurant, he couldn't help but notice the lavishness of the place. Bel Andrea's was exactly what people said it was, over-the-top fancy. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a soft golden glow over the marble floors. The open kitchen gleamed with shiny appliances, and everything screamed money. But even in all this beauty, something felt off. Elijah noticed how the staff moved quick and efficient. Sure, but they carried themselves with a sense of superiority. They weren't proud of their work. They were proud of their position. And right now, Elijah was at the bottom of that hierarchy. "Make sure you're not blocking the chef's station," a woman in a sharp black suit ordered, barely looking up from her clipboard. Elijah nodded politely. "Yes, ma'am," and stepped aside, but he could feel her eyes still on him, judging him. Nearby, two waiters stood folding napkins and whispering. Elijah didn't need to be a mind reader to know they were talking about him. Every now and then, they'd glance his way with a look that clearly said, "What's he doing here?" One of them even snickered, "Bet he messes something up in 5 minutes." Elijah just ignored them, his focus still on getting the job done. But the comments kept coming, and the way they looked at him, it wasn't just rude. It was like they saw him as less than them. He wasn't dressed in the fancy clothes they wore. His uniform was clean and practical, but to them, it was wrong. As Elijah kept unloading the boxes, the feeling of being judged, of being dismissed, grew stronger. But he stayed calm. He had work to do. As Elijah made his way back outside for the next load, he passed a group of line cooks near the grill. They stopped talking when they saw him, glancing his way with judgment in their eyes. One of them, a tall guy with a smug smirk, leaned toward the others and said loud enough for Elijah to hear, "Bet he couldn't even afford to eat here, let alone walk through the front door." Elijah's jaw tightened, but he didn't let it show. He had been through worse, and he knew the game. Let it go. Keep working. But the words still stung. The kitchen staff laughed, and Elijah could feel their eyes on him as he went back to his truck. He had heard all kinds of comments in his time, but this was different. This wasn't just a comment. It was an attack on who he was. Still, Elijah kept his focus. He had a job to do. He couldn't let them ruin his day. He loaded the second set of boxes, his mind heavy but his actions steady. He was almost done. But little did they know, this day wasn't over yet. As Elijah moved deeper into the restaurant, Bel Andres was as fancy as they come. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, casting golden light onto the shiny marble floors. The kitchen gleamed with stainless steel appliances, and everything about the place screamed wealth. But as he pushed his cart inside, Elijah noticed something under the surface. The staff moved fast, but there was a coldness to them, like they thought they were better than everyone else. They weren't proud of their work, they were proud of their rank. And right now, Elijah was at the bottom of that list. A woman in a sharp black suit walked by, not even looking up as she barked at him. "Make sure you're not blocking the chef's station." Elijah nodded, his voice calm as he replied, "Yes, ma'am." But the way she glanced at him, like he was nothing, didn't go unnoticed. He felt it. They were judging him. Still, he kept his head down, knowing the last thing he needed to do was react. But the whispers kept coming. "Guess he doesn't know how to dress for a place like this," one of the servers said. Elijah kept unloading his boxes. He was used to it, but it didn't make it any easier. He wasn't here to impress anyone, but still, this wasn't what he expected. As Elijah finished unloading the first set of boxes, he started heading back to his truck for the next load. As he passed a group of cooks near the grill, they paused their conversation to look at him. One of them, a tall man with a smirk on his face, leaned in and whispered loudly enough for Elijah to hear, "Betty couldn't even afford to eat here, let alone step through the front door." The other cooks laughed, and Elijah felt a tightness in his jaw. It was one of those moments that pushed him to the edge, but he had learned to let it go. He didn't have time to argue. He had a job to do. As he headed back to his truck, he tried to shake off their words, but they stuck with him. They didn't know who he really was, but Elijah knew that the day would come when they would. Inside the kitchen, Elijah was focused on his work when he heard one of the kitchen staff call out to him. "Hey, delivery guy, you missed a box." Elijah looked around, confused. He was sure he hadn't missed anything. One of the cooks pointed to a crate near the door. Elijah walked over and bent down to pick it up. But as soon as he grabbed the box, he realized it was empty. Laughter filled the kitchen, and the staff member who'd spoken slapped his knee. "Just messing with you, man. Relax a little." Elijah didn't say a word. He put the empty crate back in place and continued unloading the rest of his delivery, his patience wearing thin. But he didn't let it show. There was no point in letting them win. He had bigger things to focus on, and they had no idea what was coming next. The delivery was finally done. Elijah handed the signed invoice to Chef Darren. Darren didn't even look up from his phone. He scribbled his signature without a word. "You can go now," he said coldly, his eyes still glued to the screen. Elijah stood there for a moment, not rushing to leave. His gaze was calm but firm. "Have a good day," he said quietly before turning to head back to the truck. Just as he reached the door, one of the waiters muttered under his breath, "Yeah, go back to where you came from." That was the last straw. Elijah stopped. He didn't feel anger, just a steady calm. The whole room went silent. Slowly, he turned around and met the waiter's eyes. "I came here," Elijah said with a calm confidence, "to deliver something you clearly need more of, respect." Elijah leaned against his truck, the weight of the morning still on his mind. The delivery was finished, but it wasn't just the boxes he carried that day that weighed him down. It was the disrespect, the assumptions, and the way the staff had treated him. He'd seen it all before, but today felt different. Today, the mockery hadn't fazed him. It had only made him more determined. He glanced up at the grand entrance of Bel Andres, its name in gold letters glowing in the sunlight. It seemed so surreal. Just weeks ago, he had signed the papers to become the new owner of this high-end restaurant. The path that led him here had been full of struggle. Elijah didn't come for money, nor did he have any shortcuts. His journey had been about hard work and sacrifice. He was born in a small town where opportunities were scarce and dreams were hard to chase. But Elijah had always believed in working for what you wanted. He started as a dishwasher at 16. Over the years, he worked his way up from the bottom, learning everything he could about the restaurant business. And now, here he was, owner of one of Dallas's most prestigious restaurants. But he wasn't ready to announce his ownership yet. He wanted to see how the team operated first, and what he saw made it clear things had to change.